And for our final presenter, who will be joining us on Zoom, is Ashoya Avitre. She's Tongva and Scottish comic book artist and illustrator. Ashoya has been working in comic medium for over 15 years and has since contributed to numerous Eisner Award-winning books, including Umbrella Academy, Dark Horse Comics, Little Nemo, Dream Another Dream, and Little Bird Image Comics. Avitre has partnered with the Smithsonian National Museum of the American Indian on Native Knowledge 360, a national educational initiative to inspire and support teaching about Native American using comics mediums as a support. She has done work recently with Marvel Voices and Indigenous Voice series. So let's welcome Weshoyot.
Hello, and thank you so much for having me, Autry. I'm very overwhelmed after hearing the speakers before me and all of the things that they brought up. This conference is so important, and it's also tackling some very difficult discussions. We were asked to provide our opinions on what is California Native art, and it's such a loaded question. So I just wanted to extend my thank you to everybody that's participated in the lecture this weekend. What is California Native art? Is it a tattoo placed on the chin? Is it a basket finally finished with the soft scents of the plants and the hands that made it? Is it a painting or a photo or a story? Is its value greater than or less than based on the government's acknowledgement of the artist? Is it federally recognized? Is it state recognized? Is it recognized as art at all? Is it deemed watered down if my mother was not Indian? What is California Native art? Is it old and pecked stone? Is it part of ceremony? Or only authentic when our lost words are spoken over it? Is it permanent? Is it tangible? Is it seasonal or temporary or ephemeral? What is California Native art? What is California? And what is a Native? How do we gauge the power of a federal government over what comes out of us innately? Is there a power in the state government to determine what we do is of importance or not? Who determines the power of a state of being? Who determines the power in a state of mind? Is that art federally recognized? Or is that California Native art a sovereign entity? Does mixed blood cut on a basket awl leave a trace of its maker? Is a strand of her silver hair woven in the coils of blood red juncus? Does a piece of DNA caught in the deergrass bundles determine a basket's authenticity? Where is that DNA strand? Are those books of stories stored in that spiral bookcase of our genetic makeup? What is the call number for our ancestors' stories? Or are they kept permanently in the reference library only? Are our stories something we can just check out with no late fees? I'm not sure there's a tribal library card for that. Does our very existence today make a statement in whole or in part? Is that art? Is our very act of existing art? Do we belong in museums? As viewers, as people, as Indians, as artists? I am Weshoyot Alvitre. I'm a Tongva and Scottish comic book artist and illustrator. I sat with these words for weeks because I have often felt torn and placed in this strange limbo between the past and the present, the Indians and the not. My parents are both artists. They approach life giving their fullest, their most authentic selves and facets of that. And I have seen the beauty of sharing that transparency with the world, as well as the draining effects, the pains and the hurt in sharing your own authentic self with the world, because it is the only way we as artists know how to live. I feel small being asked to a place such as this, a place such as the Autry in an overwhelming cityscape such as this town, a stranger on my own homelands. I feel inconsequential among peers I admire, doing work that is so important with families spanning generations through the history of California as we know it to beyond, to lands with names only their own people can roll off of their tongues with ease and familiarity, whose stories follow each drop of their language, pouring from their mouths like honey. I have never fit into a box neatly, even here at a place like the Autry, on tribal lands, masked in asphalt and cement, advertisements and distractions. I feel outside of myself and outside of this museum, looking in and watching myself perform like a theater actor. I am art, I am an artist, but what exactly am I? And how exactly do I fit into this thing defined as California Native art, and why? A few years ago, I received a book called Marshall McKay, Weaving the Dream, as part of a lot of books I purchased online. It sat with me for a long time before I finally sat down and read it. I read it during a time I was working with a writer, Cheg Lowry, about a story involving basket weavers and narrated by baskets themselves. When my art and life align, I dive in, submerge myself completely, because it's the only way I know how to navigate both honestly in those waters. I was struggling to write a partial script for this story, reflecting on my relationship with baskets, basket weavers, and the art of basket weaving, which is shared up and down the western coast of this continent, within the borders of what is now known as California. I was struggling to relate to an art form I had always felt drawn to, although due to the lack of access to traditional basket weaving materials, it always felt outside my grasp and potential, like waking up too early from a dream not yet finished and unable to get back to sleep to complete. Once I finished reading the book on Mabel, I took it over to my dad's, as I often share good reads with him. He fostered my love of books at a young age, along with my mother, who worked as a librarian. I asked if he had read it and offered to lend him my copy. And wouldn't you know it, the sheer act of sharing such a beautiful book ended up in a story which I had never recalled hearing in the 37 years of my life. Apparently, when I was a baby and my dad running the Satwiwa Cultural Center in Newbury Park, Marshall McKay had come down and stayed with us overnight to lead a basket workshop in the old stall out back. She had brought some family, and there was some issue with a new Walkman my older sister had. Details are sparse. But the morning after, she gifted my parents with a star blanket, which was then stored along with the story and carried along with them through many moves and many more kids along the way. I went home after that day, after my dad telling me the story for the first time, and my mother recounting parts of it as well. Baffled by the lack of the story in my life and overwhelmed by the sheer amazement that the woman whose life story I had just devoured in a few days' worth of reading had been in our home when I was a child. I thought of happenstance. I thought of connectiveness and story. I wondered if she had made the quilt, or how she knew, or perhaps didn't know, the meaning of my name in a gift that just happened to be my most favorite shades of golden yellow and burnt orange, sewn diamond next to diamond in a quilt that still held all of this, tucked away in a closet for decades. Thinking about it again, she probably knew. That is what art is, that feeling, that response, that connection. Art is that beautiful thing existing in the world and how the story behind it makes it that much more beautiful. But what is art without story? What is California Native art without story? Are they one in the same? Story through repetition becomes mantra. Story by holding that memory and sharing with the world becomes art. Before writing this, I spent a few weeks quizzing my parents about the quilt and its whereabouts. Turns out my mother had given it to me, or thought she had, after my daughter was born, and ironically, I had found its exact twin at a flea market and stored the two together. My name, Weshoyot, means 2 stars. My mother never told me the story when she gifted it to me, perhaps because she didn't quite know the details, perhaps because the truth was that the quilt that she gave me reminded her of the one Mabel had given to her when she had me. Perhaps her memory needed that prodding, the act of me asking. She very well may have known who Marshall McKay was, or maybe she didn't, as I didn't until I read the book. Perhaps the twist here is that this wasn't the star quilt we were looking for. Art is a strange thing that can be carried with us across a lifespan and mold and change and become more or less meaningful depending on who owns it, how it's cared for, and who knows its secrets. The secrets and the story create the value. And this gift from a Pobo basket weaver, Marshall McKay, who just happens to be related to the man in which we were honoring this weekend, as well as relations to the fellow presenter today, tells me that the art is living still, regardless of which star quilt was the star quilt. But that's not the end of the story either. Because my mind was feeling unsettled by letting the story continue full of holes and pop stitches, in need of mending, I inquired further. It took about 2 weeks. I carried the quilts back and forth with me to my parents during weekly visits. I tried to engage each time to see if there were more parts to the story, or dates, or something else. Memories are fleeting like that, like the way the sun glimmers on walls in the late afternoon, glimmers of feelings here and now, then gone, but leaving warmth behind them. I wanted to learn more, and so I continued to sit and to listen. This is another factor in our art, being able to be silent and listen without interrupting. Sometimes the stories take time to emerge. Sometimes the art takes longer to birth itself into this world, so we may finally name it. The space in which we are listening is ceremony, be that time with a skilled teacher or time working inward with our ancestors from the past. No one can quite say how long ceremony takes, but we know when it's finished. Oftentimes that ceremony lingers in our hearts and minds of our artists for far longer than it took to make the art. It turns out there was a third star quilt to the story. It was the last one we found after spending hours sorting through family albums from my childhood this week. Turns out it ended up with my second oldest brother. It stayed with him through a very scary bout with croup and pneumonia when he was small. It was medicine. We have a blurry photo of it bundled on the couch, with its tie-downs hanging like tassels of willow, its lumped batting showing the 3 children's lives it lived through, telling stories of the greenest fresh grass covered in morning dew from Satwiwa, from watching clouds and warm sun and soft breezes whispering, to an abrupt move in a U-Haul truck down the 101 grade to the sea. It told of being laid out on the sand and listening to the waves and screaming gulls as children threw stale breadcrumbs. It told of the smell of ocean waters, tying it to our stories about Grandpa abalone diving and Newport Beach, the steatite bowl my dad returned to the sea. Sharing the world it came from up north to our lands here in Southern California, an exchange of stories, a conversation. Over time, it became heavy with story, so heavy that one day the seams popped open and new kittens played inside within its belly, so heavy that it would catch tiny toes on loose diamond patches, the way old wrinkled fingers grasp new babies' toes in play. The star blanket of my story was not the one my mom had given me after my daughter was born after all. The star quilt was also not the twin I had found at the flea market. The star quilt, the art, the story, the intangible thing that makes this story so valuable is now no more. It eventually was irreparable and lost to the sands of time and the years of children. It is captured as a memory in a photo, maybe 2, but it cannot be here with us today as much as I wanted it to be. The one hanging behind me is one that I made in college. I think these faint childhood memories nudged me to make it. I think the colors I chose were subliminally trying to connect back to the quilt I grew up with from my childhood, a way of remanifesting the memory into being. It is a novice attempt at Mabel's quilt. It was an attempt to restore the memory and all that that held, telling a story without me yet knowing that story. I would hear it over 15 years later. I reflect this week on this disappointment, the sadness of not having the quilt to share with you. I wondered how I was going to rearrange this talk for you, to try to have the feelings make sense in my comparisons of what California Indian art truly is. There are no happy ending here that would make you well up with joy and happy emotions, to end this on a high note, applause, like in a movie. And it made me think too, art is not always beautiful. It is sometimes sadness. Art is sometimes frustration, anger, and especially California Native art. It is sometimes sad, because so much of it is the response to loss, to trauma, to intergenerational flaws and pains, that perhaps this story is still quite on point, as much as each star point was on that quilt. Part of California Native art is navigating these painful spaces and working through them. Sometimes that's in reaction, sometimes it's in care. Sometimes it's in mending scraps that have come loose over the years, just like the original star quilt eventually did. One consistent thing within California Native art is the nature of paying attention to what came before you, whether it be a story or a process or a combination of things. While previous artists from California have paved the way for us to be here today, to have our creative freedoms, we must not forget the work that they put out into the world to soften it, to make it more gentle for us to create new art inside and feel safe in doing so, to not feel so alone. We must also be aware that even if they are not here with us now, they can still teach us so much if we take the time to listen, by observing, by being attentive, and by showing respect for them and their work as much as we can. For we would not be here today without previous California Native artists, in the same way we owe our very existence to our ancestors' steadfastness and strength in knowing that they would leave things for us generations into the future time. The star quilt is the same. The pattern is shared among quilters. It has been done for generations and generations with no name. Each interpretation is unique in its own color palette, fabric, sewing skill, and finish. However, the underlying essence of the quilt as art and story has lasted generations. So much that star quilts and star quilt motif have been deemed almost traditional. The quilt too is a metaphor for a foreign form of self-expression, being adopted and turned into something on our own as Native people. It holds story and comfort in an object of beauty, regardless of flaws, regardless of technique. We as Native people are all sewn together by a connective stitch. We as Native people are all tied into the artwork structure in some way, either as a participant in its creation or as a viewer. We are California Native art, and it is us. But what is California Native art then? Because star quilts are not traditional for us. Neither is cotton or sewing machines. In fact, I don't know if Marshall McKay made this quilt or if it was given to her to give to someone else. Perhaps there's another layer of story there, in fact. However, the story with the quilt and the interaction between viewer and physical piece is art. You listening to this story are now tied down into the quilt, into the art. You are now a knot that holds it in place, strengthens it, so it lasts just a little bit longer. The hands this quilt has gone through and how they have molded the story that is now is art. And we are California Indians, as they like to label us. And so it becomes California Indian art. California Native art, we are creators. We are forever participating in a story. We are art. I use this story as an example as I felt joy in sharing this tiny moment in reconnecting, however short it may be and how significant or insignificant at this time. 37 years later, and as I have been working on reconnecting myself to plant and traditional knowledge regarding weaving and basket weavers. This story for me is priceless and exceptionally meaningful to myself as a person and myself as an artist, meaningful as a California Native, as a California Indian. I share with you because it's a simple exchange, ephemeral at this point, a story and a metaphor. Yet, with how the story is held and carried, the meaning therein becomes eternal, to outlast each stitch, each square of cotton, beyond that star quilt's life. The story may survive moth nibbles and sun fades, broken stitches and cotton wefts, tiny kittens and baby toes. Isn't that how art is? Individual always, and yet collectively participatory to those it is shared with, a bit like memories. Isn't that what California Indians have in common with each other? Individually displaced, separated, cut from cloth scraps and remnants of survivors, and mixed cloth, and yet still collectively a people holding memories. The quilt is reflective of so much trauma we share as California Native people. Different shades of cloth, different degrees of mixed blood and intertribal relationships in those hues of golden yellows and burnt orange, collecting memories, stitched together into a strong, beautiful piece of artwork that took time and care to assemble, yet brings us joy in viewing and warmth in its use. Beautiful, but useful. The art is a quilt. The art is a memory. It is a basket. It is a tattoo. It is abalone jewelry, regalia, braided dogbane cordage, and gathered tule. The art is our voice. It is a song. It is repetition, ceremony. It is the marks our hands make in echo, repeating patterns our ancestors made on rock, in sand, on paper, in skin. It is art. We are artists, and the thing we live is art. It's breath, it's blood. It oozes from us. It is our life, our very being, and it reflects all who came before us that made it possible for us to retell our stories continue our songs and create something meaningful in this world with our hands and minds and hearts. Why, you ask, is it art? Because we live and breathe the things that we make. With the sincerity and focus that we are creating is meaningful to us individually and meaningful to us collectively. When we make art, we are in ceremony. There's a headspace we get into practicing our craft, which shares pieces with our ancestors and pieces of our future selves in innovating the things that come out of our hands and into the world. There are prayers involved and sometimes profanities. There are successes made and strengths more so. In working through our failures to reach levels of realization, only those who make it their lives work to pursue may see. Art, California native art. Are the things we create outside a realm of today's parameter for success? Yes, oftentimes they are. We are navigating ways to show respect for the world we are living in through our art, using materials as vessels for the work we are birthing in the sounds of new songs we breathe out while we make art. It goes beyond any measured material success in this modern world, and it is fitting because we are not of this time, and yet we fill it with our being. We build those connections to materials, to spaces, to land, to those before us and those who survived so that we can be here today, up here in front of you. We built those connections to our community by trying to explain what it is that we do and why it is important for the well-being of all. Is my life meaningful to you? Individually, collectively, in community? Because my life is my art and my art is my life. Without one, I will fade away indefinitely, like breathing, inhalation, exhalation, breath without art. I may simply cease to exist. Would I be living if I wasn't making a living off of my way of living? Yes, because you cannot pay me to breathe each day. Creating art is involuntary like breath. It's immeasurable like blood. It's coded in us, climbing ladders and fish traps like DNA. Does mixed blood and mixed heritage keep us from breathing? Does having mixed heritage and mixed blood keep me from making art? No, but it can make me take pause. It sometimes manages to take my breath away in quiet sobs and gasps. We are all human beings at our core and our output, our stories, our breath is ours alone, individually. And yet our stories, our art, as California Indians also belongs to each other collectively, as community. It's how we share, how we heal, how we crawl out from and move beyond these dark spaces we have had to live in to protect our lives, protect our spirits from being eaten, after all we have endured to all that we will become. Sometimes we must make art in the dark, alone, away from everyone. Art is ceremony. In the same way, sometimes we must practice sweat, reflect, and emerge from dark spaces. Art is flowing through our veins and dripping off of our bodies, like insulted beads of our skin, emanating out of every pore. We can taste art. It will always be reflective of who we are, who we all are, in story, in memory, and in present today, in presence of the future. So what brought me here, to this point now? I recently have been reading a new book, Becoming Story by Greg Saris, the same Greg Saris of whose words captured me with Mabel McKay weaving the dream. I didn't read that book too long ago, and actually was reminded of it when I read it for the first time just the other day on Facebook, almost 1 year to the day. I am here to remember the impact of Marshall McKay, who was taken too soon from a virus in this pandemic we have all been existing through. And truth be told, I didn't come in person today because I'm grappling of what is safe for myself and as a caregiver to my children and family, weighing responsibility with risk every day. For Marshall McKay, it seemed to be navigating the world of survival and survivance in these modern times. Through the work he did for his tribal people and for the work he did for artists, he understood the importance of story and expression and its ties with reinstating sovereignty in this dominant culture we are constantly navigating. He supported those culture bearers, those storytellers, those artists and creators, like the stitches that hold quilt blocks together, and he understood the larger picture. that strong, even threads create structure and reveal the larger beauty of the community, just like this star quilt. He spoke similarly on this metaphor too, much to my surprise, in a lecture to UC Davis 13 years ago that I found a few days ago. His final thought from the lecture was this, and I quote, "I like to think of California Native tribes as a beautiful tapestry created by a beautiful artist, a Native artist. Each thread and material that goes into creating this tapestry is unique and beautiful. Each thread varies in size, length, width, texture, color, and is unique in its own way. Each thread must be in place in order to see the entire picture. A half-finished tapestry does not present the clearest or most beautiful picture. If one simple thread is taken out of that tapestry, it becomes loose, and the entire picture begins to disintegrate, and the overall product begins to unravel and lose its form. The tribes in California are no different. Each tribe in California is a thread with a different background story, history, membership, and interests. When we work together, we create a beautiful tapestry, an image of all of the tribes living in California. This is especially true when we assert our sovereignty and create a picture of what the California tribes are. We are not another population demographic that can be controlled by the state. We are each our own sovereign nation that can do and is doing much to contribute to the human race. So I ask you, what does it mean to be California Indian? It means moving forward with what you are given in your lifetime, to continue on and persevere out of respect for those who came before you, and to leave footprints of familiarity and softness for those in the future to step into and feel in their whole body. What does it mean to be a California Indian artist? With so much loss, with so many scraps of who your people were before you, and so many missing pieces in between. It means that you put those pieces back together and not discard them. You carefully line them up and slow down to process your thought. You try to create something beautiful through repetition, placement, and through repetition, you heal. Through prayer, you find placement. You put those pieces back together with care and add some cloth from your own skin to complete something of beauty. You practice ceremony. It will never be the same, the thing that you create with your hands. We will never be carbon copies of those who came before us. Our duty as California Indian artists is to take what we know, the things that make up our whole being, and put them back together in a way uniquely our own, and yet reflective of the fabric from which we have been woven. The basketry stitches that make up our very being, the quilt pieces that complete us as a whole of many parts, the bundle foundations at our core. This also means embracing our flaws, our skip stitches and buckled seams. This means identifying those feelings that slip in and make us miss a stitch, as material memory of what makes us human, as intentional flaw of a perfect pattern to let spirit pass through. California Indian art contains these marks, not flaws, the intentional mistake of humbleness. Basket weavers know we are unique as our coils and counts and leave room for creators' meticulous skill to speak through. Rug weavers understand this too and make sure to add their own art to the work that they do as a people and are defined by the finished ebb and flow of churro and patterns given to them by Creator. The requirement of imperfection within the art that we create is the most human trait that we can all share. It is what keeps us evolving into the future. It keeps us humble. It allows us to continually strive to learn more about what makes us tick, what makes us want to make art, what makes us exhale, breathe. It reminds us of our creation stories, of the conversations of the original people, of repetition, of prayer, of time. We make art to make the passage of one generation to the next, to reflect backwards to our past and forward to our future. California Native art shows that we have an incredible future ahead, and it is in thanks to all that have been here before us. Many thank you.
Thank you, Weshoyot.